Well, most of you guys know that Glenda and I live at Clucas Lake. What you may not know is we live in kind of a rustic lodge slash house that sits about 50 feet above the water, facing east. So I get an unobstructed view of the sunrise every morning. So it's a great spot, real easy on the soul. But 2 weeks ago, I was down on my dock working on the kicker motor for my fishing boat. I looked over and there was a father and a teenage son fishing off another dock just down from our property. I didn't know them. The place is a B&B, but it was a nice sunny day. They looked like they were having a good time, so I gave them a friendly wave and went about my business. Well, I was working on my boat for about 3 hours, but for the duration of that time, they didn't catch a thing. They were using the right lures. They were using the right color of lures for the conditions. They were casting out into deep enough water. They were doing the right countdown before starting their retrieval. They were reeling in at a nice slow speed. They just weren't catching anything. Been there, done that 1,000 times. I finished what I was doing, put all my tools away, and I just sat there in the dock for a while enjoying the view. But after a time, I started to hear thunder rumbling away off to the west. It wasn't long before the sky started to darken. The atmosphere got that, it's going to rain feeling about it. So I quickly ran up to the house, grabbed my fishing rod, and headed back down to the dock. And just as I got there, it started raining. Not a heavy rain, it was just spitting, but the father and son started packing up their gear and getting their lawn chairs all folded up. At the same time they were doing that, I walked out to the end of my dock, cast my lure out into the lake. I got maybe one reel on it, bang, fish on. Reeled it back into the dock, landed a nice big fat 2-pound kokanee. Pulled the hook out, whacked it over the head, and started to make my way off the dock, and I got the look. I've seen it before. When I used to lead mountain climbing parties, you come to the top of a false peak, you get that look. A false peak is where you're climbing on the rock, and all you can see is the sky above this peak, and you think, there's the peak, and then you come to the top of it, and you realize that the real peak's way off. You get the look. Whenever I would do that, I'd look over to the rookie climbers in our party, and they would, and it wasn't anger. It's not anger. It's more like a cross between disappointment and betrayal, and that's what I got from this father and son on the dock over from ours. I felt bad. I really did. I thought, well, maybe this is a teaching moment. Maybe I should give them some advice as to what just transpired. But then I thought, no, they're just going to think I'm a know-it-all. Then I contemplating making a comment like, oh, must be beginner's luck. But, my boat's outside here. It's all covered in tournament labels. Even my kicker motor's got a big fish on label on this side. So I thought, they're not going to buy that. They're going to know that I'm not new to this game. So then I considered giving them the fish. I thought that would be pretty condescending, though. You're so bad at fishing, my freezer's bursting at the seams. You can have this one. So I did the wise thing, and I ran away. I just motored back up to my house where I didn't have to deal with the look any longer. But the difference between what I was doing on the lake that day and what they were doing comes down to one word, and that word is understanding. You see, it was obvious from their lure choice and their techniques that they had knowledge about fishing, and it may not have been any less than my own knowledge. But I understood something that apparently they didn't. What I understood after more than a half century of fishing, more like 60 years, is that when raindrops first hit the surface of a lake, not a torrential downpour, but just a nice light rain, for about 5 minutes, fishing gets real hot. And then it drops right off, which is why it felt even worse when they unpacked their lawn chairs, re-rigged their gear, sat in the rain for the next half hour, still not catching anything. But the moral of the story is that there's a difference between knowledge and understanding. Just this week, the new movie Oppenheimer was released. It's making a real rave. It's released in theaters all around the world. I would encourage you to see it because alongside the birth of Jesus Christ and the adoption of fossil fuels as the Earth's primary energy source, the Manhattan Project probably ranks as one of the most important moments in human history. The most famous physicist of the day, Albert Einstein, a lot of people don't know this, he was left out of the project, even though the whole thing was his idea to start with. And his work provided the foundation for the research. The U.S. State Department felt he was too left-leaning to be trusted. But in 1925, Albert Einstein was speaking at the Royal Society of London when another physicist stood up and said, special relativity has been around for 20 years. We understand the interaction between light and energy and time. He said, what we're lacking is a viable model that describes planetary orbit caused by gravity. Einstein stood in silence for a moment, and then he said, here, do this. He said, stretch a thin rubber sheet at waist height across a room and roll a bowling ball onto it. Now, he said, it will distort the center of that sheet into an inverse cone shape. He said, now take a marble and roll it out onto it. The moment the marble encounters a distortion, he said, it will begin to orbit the bowling ball. He said, that's a two-dimensional model. He said, if you translate that into 3 dimensions, there's your viable model of planetary orbit. And then he said something that you can find to this day in quotation books. He said, if you cannot take a complex subject and describe it in simple terms, then no matter how much you know about it, you still don't understand it. Difference between knowing and understanding is a major theme in the book of Proverbs. But as we'll discover this morning, the book of Proverbs takes us even one step deeper into the journey of wisdom. This morning we're going to be looking at Proverbs chapter 2. So let me begin by reading some of the text to you. And we're assuming these are Solomon's words at this point, as he employs one of the literary devices that we looked at last week, the advice of a father to his son. Now, what's really unusual about Solomon choosing this approach is that the Bible tells us that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Yet we only know the name of one of his sons. Isn't that weird? Rehoboam was his name, and he didn't turn out to be a very good leader at all. But here's what Solomon had to say. Proverbs chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, there's that word, understanding. Verse 3, indeed, if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, there it is again, and if you look for it as silver and search for it as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. That's 3 times there. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Word is used 4 times in 6 verses. Do you think Solomon was trying to get us to notice something? There's a subtle equation tucked away in the pages of the book of Proverbs, and it looks like this. Knowledge plus understanding plus faith equals wisdom. Now, it seems simple enough, but it's amazing how many people in this world think it's possible to resolve this equation. In other words, to arrive at wisdom while ignoring one or more of these 3 constants, knowledge, understanding, and faith. In reality, even the simplest of these constants, knowledge, has not only always been an elusive concept, but the acquisition of authentic knowledge has not become any easier in today's world. There was a time not so long ago when the only force capable of modifying knowledge was new evidence. In 1905, Albert Einstein, when we're talking about him here, published his special theory of relativity. At that time, he postulated that no object that has mass is capable of exceeding the speed of light. That's what the calculations told him. But 3 years ago, scientists discovered that neutrino particles traveling through super purified water breaks the light barrier. They break the light barrier. That changed our knowledge of quantum physics. Evidence that modifies knowledge is the reason that we no longer believe that diseases are caused by bad night air. But in today's world, we've become increasingly open to the idea that knowledge can be modified by opinion. If someone thinks they know something, regardless of evidence to the contrary, then what they think they know, what their opinion is readily received as knowledge by millions of others. That's an incredibly dangerous trend. The loss of absolute truth in our world is coming at a most inopportune time. Right when our world is being threatened by problems that really demand a high level of discernment. It brings to mind the words of Pontius Pilate in his conversation with Jesus when he declared, "Que veritas," what is truth? But knowledge is only the first constant in this equation of wisdom. Even more elusive is the concept of understanding. Have you ever heard of something called the Fermi paradox? Enrico Fermi was another astrophysicist on this Manhattan Project. In 1950, he was sitting down to lunch with 3 other physicists at the Los Alamos laboratory, and the conversation turned to the possibility of intelligent life on other planets. Now, we have to realize that in 1950, there was no evidence of any exoplanets outside of our own solar system. We've since discovered that literally every star in the universe has a planetary system, and that billions of them have an environment that could support life. But in 1950, all that was speculation built on probabilities. But these physicists, using their knowledge of astronomy, were discussing those probabilities. Edward Teller, one of them, argued that it was highly probable that millions of intelligent civilizations existed throughout the universe, some of which were less advanced than humanity, some of which were more advanced. And those that were more advanced, because they were operating under the same laws of physics that humanity is, would have undoubtedly gone through at least a phase where they discovered radio waves. And they were using them for communication. Therefore, Teller speculated, millions of civilizations were transmitting radio waves and other forms of communication that could be readily detected. That's when Enrico Fermi uttered the 4 words that have formed the basis of the Fermi paradox. He simply asked, "Then where is everyone?" The Fermi paradox has presented a challenge to astrophysicists for the last 70 years. The discrepancy between the high probability of extraterrestrial intelligence and the incredible lack of evidence as to the existence of such. Next year will be the 40th anniversary of SETI. SETI is Carl Sagan's search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And in all that time, 24/7 monitoring, there has not been a credible whisper from the whole universe. All current evidence points to the conclusion that we are all alone. But my point is that Enrico Fermi took all of this knowledge that was laid out in front of him, all of his knowledge that his colleagues were wrestling with, and he applied understanding to it. If knowledge is the acquisition of truth, then understanding is what to do with that truth. Anyone can become knowledgeable about a subject by reading, researching, memorizing facts. Understanding how to use those facts is something entirely different. But there's a third constant that completes that circle of wisdom. And we see it in the next verse, beginning with verse 7. He holds success in store for the upright. He is a shield to those whose walk is blameless, for he guards the course of the just and protects the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand, there's that word again, understand what is right and just and fair, every good path, for wisdom will enter your heart and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. That's an interesting verse because it implies that to some people, at least, knowledge is not pleasant to their soul. I think that probably applies to those who encounter knowledge that runs contrary to their opinions. But the critical idea in this verse is the first part, where success and guidance and protection is provided by God to those who live a life of faith. Knowledge and understanding will not lead to wisdom unless faith is also present. That's why the book of Proverbs repeatedly points out that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You know, in talking to atheist academics, which I often do, I more than often, I encounter the idea, what comes up is the Big Bang Theory. Big Bang Theory provides evidence that God did not create the universe. Interesting conclusion, because on that same Manhattan Project, that same team that Enrico Fermi served on, there was another physicist. His name was Georges Lemaitre. Georges Lemaitre was a Belgian who was also an ordained minister. This is a picture of him here. There he is, there, on this side. There's a picture of him with Albert Einstein. Lemaitre published the Big Bang Theory. He's the guy that came up with it. He suggested that the Big Bang was not really an explosion in space, it was an explosion of space. What we now call the Standard Model in physics affirms that there was no space or time before the Big Bang. But Lemaitre said you can't even use the word before. He said because there was no before to even speak of. He said the Big Bang was so different than any explosion that we're accustomed to that it doesn't even require a central point, it doesn't even have a central point. He said that's because it was an explosion of reality itself. He said if the Big Bang were an ordinary explosion, we'd be able to look out and see the outer edge of the explosion with all empty space beyond, which is what Einstein actually predicted. But Lemaitre suggested that what we're looking out into is reality itself in all directions, and there is no edge because beyond the expanding universe, there's no reality. Now, if that makes your head hurt, don't worry about it. But Lemaitre theorized that if he was right, we ought to be able to measure the faint background radiation from the moment of creation, uniform in all directions. Because the Big Bang was reality coming into existence in a single moment. Now, on May 20th, 1964, Georges Lemaitre was proved right when two astronomers working at the Bell Lab in New Jersey measured what is now known as cosmic background radiation, equal in all directions. Do you know what Georges Lemaitre's hypothesis was when he first published the Big Bang Theory? This is the theory that proves that God didn't create the universe. His hypothesis was to prove that God created the universe in a single moment out of nothing. And the existence of equal residual radiation would be the evidence. Lemaitre was right. Einstein was wrong. In fact, Lemaitre and Einstein disagreed on countless subjects. Einstein once told him, your calculus is impressive, but your physics is atrocious. Lemaitre felt that Einstein was asking people to believe, with no evidence, that everything that exists came out of nothing, all by itself. He was asking people to believe, with supporting evidence, that everything that exists came out of something, and that something is God. Here's the fascinating thing about this. Lemaitre would always include the existence of God in his scientific theories. To him, seemingly impossible ideas were okay to explore because nothing is impossible for God. Einstein would only look at theories that were scientifically probable. As a result, Lemaitre predicted an expanding universe, the existence of black holes, the existence of gravitational waves, and the entire realm of quantum mechanics, all things that Einstein wouldn't touch. But on all these points and more, Lemaitre has been proven right. His only advantage over Einstein was faith. Isn't that interesting? To him, the available knowledge, as well as the skills to bring understanding to that knowledge, were without meaning unless God was at the center of the scientific endeavor. He was a Christian. Einstein was an atheist. I think it's important to grasp the idea that Proverbs does not suggest that these three elements of wisdom are really arranged in a progressive order. You don't first acquire knowledge and then apply understanding to it and then sort of run it through the filter of faith. They're simultaneous parts of a whole. Together they create a worldview that results in wisdom. And 2 out of 3 doesn't cut it. If you have knowledge plus faith minus understanding, you'll just become a legalist. If you have knowledge plus understanding without faith, then you'll be little more than an information processor. You'll have intellect without wisdom. And if you have an understanding of things, even with faith, but you lack the knowledge to undergird it, you'll just drift into heresy. Unfortunately, there are far too many 2 out of 3 Christians in today's world, which is why Solomon compiled this amazing collection so we can access everything we need in life to become wise. There are a lot of myths floating around as to the best way to go about acquiring wisdom. One is that wisdom comes with age and experience. The problem is there are a lot of old, experienced twits in this world. Another is that great learning will result in wisdom. But, some of the most dysfunctional, unwise people I've known also have PhDs. I've heard others say that adversity and suffering is the path to wisdom. But after spending 7 years as chaplain up at the prison here, I met hundreds of people who were all too familiar with adversity and suffering, and they were a most unwise tribe of people. 3,000 years ago, before anyone knew the earth was round, before anyone was aware that bacteria caused disease, before people understood that stars were distant suns and planets were balls of matter suspended in the ether of space, Solomon and his contemporaries unraveled the mechanics of wisdom. Knowledge plus an understanding of what to do with knowledge, plus faith, the fear of God, as Solomon put it, together form the path to wisdom. For all the incredible abundance of knowledge in today's world, one of the rarest virtues is authentic wisdom. But time spent in the pages of Proverbs is God's remedy to that ailment. Well, we're going to transition into our time of response now, where you can maybe have a conversation with God, process some of what you heard today. If you'd like someone to pray with you, our prayer team will be available in the prayer room, just off to the side of our worship center here. Our worship team is going to come up now. And during the first song, you are invited to come to the front and partake of the Lord's Supper, the cup by which we remember the blood of Jesus Christ shed for our forgiveness, and the bread by which we remember his body broken for us. Once everyone has shared in communion, members of our hospitality team will come and receive the morning's offering. You can also give it. There's a little kiosk at the back here out in the foyer. You can give there. And for those of you online, you can you can give by clicking on the donate button on the web page. But for now, let's worship God together.